This was around 2004 when I was 20 years old and living in a small, 2-level apartment on the main floor of a building. Out front, there were 3 stairs, then a deck, then 3 more stairs to the front door, and another little narrow deck that ran the length of the front of my apartment, which, besides the door, was all windows. The main floor was a tiny kitchen and living room, and a door to the hallway for laundry and parking access, all of which is totally visible from the windows. It was fall in Western Canada during daylight savings, pitch black early, and surprisingly warm for the season. I had all my windows open and hadn't closed the blinds as to get a breeze in, and was talking on the phone to my sister. I had my back to the windows, and when I turned around, I thought I saw something weird at the window. It was really bright inside, so I turned the main light off and see a man pressed against the window screen, staring at me. I screamed and told my sister a man is on my deck looking at me. He seemed to take off into the darkness. I turned off all the lights inside, put the outside ones on, and I was babbling to my sister like, "Holy shit, a peeping Tom, so scary I can't believe it." And then he just walks back up the deck. I screamed again, "He's back, I have to call 911, hung up immediately, and did, while his face was pressed against the window, and it was still open. Windows were floor to ceiling with screened, crank-open bottom sections that I had opened to the max and could for sure accommodate a determined person crawling in. He could hear me call 911, but he didn't move. I had crouched down in the dark room, and the main light was off so he couldn't see me, but I had the lights on beside the door to the hallway and on the stairs to the bedroom. I didn't want to move and let him know where I was, although I should have run into the hall and banged on a neighbor's door, but I was in shock, and after all, the cops are coming from a station 10 blocks away. They'll be here soon, right? 911 operator. We can't seem to find your address. I'm directly behind the rec center at X and Y streets, corner unit, unmistakable area landmark, and the only apartment building here. The man at the window starts banging on the glass. I was whispering, but I assume he heard me give panic directions, and neither of us could hear sirens yet. It felt like this would go on forever when he finally just ran off. I peek out and I see a police car, so I told the operator they're here, and then the car starts to drive away. The operator told me to go outside and flag them down. I don't know why I actually did this because I was scared shitless, but when I did, they rolled down their window. "Ma'am, do you need help? You're looking for me, I think. I called 911. We're just driving by. But what's the problem?" They never found the man that terrified me and made me feel so unsafe that I moved. But it was truly the cops not being able to find the only apartments behind a notable building that completely shook me. The frightening end note is when I moved out, they tried to charge me because, quote, "the downstairs screens are shredded from your cats." The screens were in pristine condition the day the creeper showed up, and that was the last day I opened the downstairs windows, or blinds, or even used the front door. The property manager laughed and mocked me, called BS when I said that someone cut them, until I showed her the police report. She lived there too. Not so funny suddenly. This experience happened to my roommates and I in our second year of university. The city we went to school in was considered a very safe university town. The most we had heard of happening was drunk morons doing typical drunk moron things. This was also the first time we were all really living on our own. First-year residences are nice, but it's basically an extended summer camp rather than a typical living situation. The 4 of us girls lived in a nice townhouse that never once had a creepy vibe or weird neighbors in the months we had lived there. The only eerie part was that every weekend we were the only people who stayed in the complex. All of our neighbors either went home or stayed elsewhere until returning Monday for classes. This was never something we had given a second thought to, considering that was fairly normal for a uni town, especially because our complex was only made up of about 4 other townhouses. The complex was surrounded by walking trails and farm fields, which we all loved. It was like our quiet spot away from the chaos of college kids. There were a few farmhouses we could see from our backyard, but other than that, we were fairly secluded. Being about 5'6", I was the tallest of my roommates. by a considerable amount as well. I was also the only one who out of the group had been in a handful of scary situations. Due to this, I was the only one, up to this point, who would lock the doors, windows, and garage before leaving or going to bed. My roommates all grew up in small, very safe towns, so it was uncommon for them to lock doors back home. They were also incredibly kind and trusting to everyone, never considering the bad intentions some may have. The night in question started very normally. We had planned on having a wine and movie night. By 8:30-ish, we had all settled on the couch in our living room and had started a comedy. With it being November, it was already completely dark outside, other than our porch light we could see from the small window at the very top of our door. None of us were tall enough to see anything out of that window though, so we relied entirely on our peephole. It took a great amount of effort for me to convince my roommates to check the peephole before opening the door. This was a talk we had after one roommate opened the door for our neighbor's very drunk friend who threw up all over our entryway. Not long after ordering our takeout, we heard a banging on our front door. Jess made a joke about how the delivery guy must have taken a helicopter to get here so quickly. It didn't sound like a typical delivery guy's knock either, but between the few glasses of wine and the carefree attitude of the night, we didn't really pay it too much mind. It was my roommate's turn to pay this week. I'll call her Meg for the sake of the story. Out of the group, she's the smallest, barely 5 feet. She is also the most trusting person I think I've ever met. She ran up to her room to grab her wallet. This took at most 30 seconds. During this time, the banging continued and was getting more aggressive. I figured maybe it was cold or he had other stuff to do, so we yelled up to get her to hurry. The banging continued to get harder and harder, and I started to feel a bit uneasy. When she came back down, I told her to check the peephole before opening it, as she was usually the one to just open up. She got to the door and looked out the peephole. She could barely reach it on a good day, so when she said she couldn't see anything, my other roommate and I got up to help. My second roommate, I'll call her Jess, is a very funny person. There are very few things that she would not turn into a joke. Jess got to the door before I did and looked out the peephole. The person on the other side was still banging away. When she turned to look at me, I knew something was wrong. She looked incredibly confused, a look I had rarely seen from her, as she was very clever. Within a second, she had gone back in for another look. This time, her face was not confused. She looked afraid. This made my stomach knot up. She is a horror movie fanatic, and she doesn't scare easily. "I think someone is covering the peephole," she whispered at us. This time, I looked out the peephole, seeing that, yep, something was covering it. We could still see the porch light shining through the window at the top, so we knew it wasn't a case of it being too dark. By now, our other roommate, who I'll call Anne, had walked down the hall trying to find out what was going on. She was easily the drunkest of the four of us. Even sober, though, she seemed to think she was invincible. "What's your problem? Open the door. The poor dude has his hands full," was Anne's wise idea. Jess and I explained what was going on, and at this point, Meg, Jess, and I all had the same gut feeling that something was off. That's when Jess asked Meg to check the website she had just ordered the food on. Meg had not even placed the order. Between the wine and the silliness of the earlier night, she had selected our food, but did not finish the last step. The banging continued as our situation started to sink in. Anne still did not seem to grasp what was happening and tried to unlock the door. "Stop!" I snapped at her. Immediately, I knew it was too loud. For the first time, the person on the other side of the door spoke.
"This is the police. Open the door now. We have a few questions to ask you."
A man's voice practically growled back at us. This sobered me up right away. I looked over at Meg, who was already welling up, then at Jess, who had gone completely pale. At this point, Anne also realized something was not right and froze, which is the least Anne thing she could have done. The banging was getting increasingly harder, to the point we could physically see the door breathe with each hit. Meg took Anne upstairs, trying to calm each other down and check if there was a police car parked outside and make sure that our windows were locked. Though it was hard to do, it was possible to get onto part of our roof that made it possible to get into Anne's window. We heard a window slam, immediately knowing that it had been Anne's window. For some reason, this made what was happening seem very, very real. "Show me your badge, then we'll open the door," I yelled back. Instead of a response, it sounded like the guy started to kick the door. I told Jess to call the police and ask if they had an officer dispatched to our address. Jess was shaking so badly at this point that it was hard for her to even dial. Now Meg had come back downstairs, sharing that there was no police car outside. Anne trailed right behind her, standing on the stair landing, trying to get a look outside the window at the top of our door. At that moment, my blood ran cold, remembering that the man at the door had said "we" and not "I." Jess had just come back to the same realization. She sprinted to our back door, a large sliding glass one, which she double-checked that it was locked, and thankfully it had been. She drew the curtains as well, trying to minimize the chance of them seeing in. Within a minute, though, the knocking started at our back door as well. Thank God she had closed the curtains, because the idea of seeing whoever was doing this still gives me chills. "Uncover the peephole and show me your badge," I yelled again, trying to sound as intimidating as a young college girl could. We were met with silence, which was so much worse than the banging. "What's your badge number at least? Prove to us that you're the police." The only response I got back was a gravelly,
"I can't do that."
Jess had handed her phone off to Meg, who was sobbing now, trying to speak to the dispatcher. The banging, now coming from both sides of the house, must have been heard by the operator. "Is there someone trying to break in?" she asked Meg. Meg frantically asked if there was supposed to be an officer at our house. The answer we all knew by now was no. Meg babbled that at least 2 men tried to get us to unlock the door by impersonating a police officer. "Try to stay calm, stay on the phone with me. Police are on their way to your address," the operator told Meg. "How long will they be?" Meg asked back. "No more than 10 minutes, the dispatcher responded. That made Meg cry even harder, realizing just how long 10 minutes really is. The door was being hit so hard, I worried it would break. Jess ran back towards our back door, making me worry that our kitchen window had been open. Trying to think, I put a chair under the doorknob and sat down hoping the door would hold. Jess came back to the front door, holding a kitchen knife and a fire extinguisher, which were the only things we had to protect ourselves in case they got in. Anne, now sitting on the landing, flinched with each hit. She was farm tough and had no issue dealing with animals 3 times her size. What was happening now, though, was entirely different. We had nothing really to deter whoever wanted in. No prods and no backup until the real police showed.
"Open the f***ing door,"
the man yelled at us, not caring if we thought they were the police anymore. Then it got very quiet again, which made me want to throw up. The only thing worse than what was happening was not knowing where the men were. The idea of both of them moving to the back door made me absolutely terrified. If they really wanted to, it would take very little effort to smash through the plate glass. Instead, the knocking at the back door had completely ceased. Within seconds of that, the front door started being hit again. Trying to wrap my mind around why they would leave the easiest entry point to come back to the front, I realized the back door was visible to the main road. Whether they had seen a car or heard us talking to the police, they were smart enough to not want to be seen by anyone. Jess then said something I had not thought of. "I don't think they want to rob us. There are so many houses that are empty. Why would they come to the only house with the lights on?" My whole body went cold, and I didn't have an answer. But the dread that I had been feeling multiplied by 5. Meg clearly felt the same, because at this point she was practically hyperventilating. The 3 of us stayed quiet for a minute, awful scenarios running through our heads. Anne moved back up the last few steps and out of sight. The operator, who we had forgotten was on speakerphone, spoke, which practically made me jump out of my skin. She must have felt how terrified we were and tried to calm us down. "The police are 2 minutes away. They have their sirens turned off and the lights are on. You should be able to see them very soon. Stay on the phone with me so I can confirm when they're outside for you," she said. The men outside were starting to seem desperate. The sound of glass shattering had me turning to the back door, fully expecting to see one or even two people inside of our house. But the door was still intact. Instead, our porch light, the only light illuminating our dark street, went out. They had destroyed the only way we would have been able to identify whoever was on the other side. F*** you little whores, a voice we hadn't heard before. Whoever was at the back door spat out. This was way worse than the initial speaker. It was full of so much hate and venom that it scared me more than the banging itself. Up until this point, I could have convinced myself that they had wanted our valuables, but this voice made me understand that he had wanted us. To this day, I have never heard a voice come close to that level of malice. It sounded like he wanted to inflict serious harm on us. If he had gained entry, I know he would have. Somehow, I wanted the first man to speak again, instead of whichever sick bastard had just spoken. Until now, I may have done a half-decent job at hiding how scared I was, but that voice absolutely ruined my ability to stay stone-faced. If they got in, there is absolutely nothing that I would be able to do to stop them. Not for me, and not for my friends. We would have been at the mercy of the monsters outside. It was so quiet, it sounded like a gunshot when our mailbox opened. Anne ran back downstairs. "I see the sirens. They're coming down the main road," she whispered, hoping not to have the men hear. The same man spoke again one more time, so slowly that I almost thought he was done after each word. In that same awful, calm voice, he read out a letter addressed to the four of us. Jess, Meg, Anne, OP. Those are nice names. I'll be back soon, girls. Then we'll have some fun. I felt tears rolling down my face. I hadn't realized I had started crying, but I knew he meant what he had said. I tried to pull my mind out of the dark pit that sentence had sent it to, waiting, praying that the police had surprised them, hoping they would not get the chance to come back. Then, silence. None of us dared to speak, worried that we would not hear if they moved to another point of entry. Instead, the silence persisted for what felt like a lifetime. The operator was the first one to speak again, telling us that the police are out front. She told us to stay in the house until the police knocked on the door. The operator told us that we had done well and that we were in good hands now. We opened the door to be met by two kind-looking older police officers who we immediately let in. Glass shards covered our front stoop from our porch light. It looked like it had been ripped out of the wall and smashed onto the concrete below. There were now several police cars out front of our previously quiet home. The headlights on all the cars were shining down the street towards the walking trail. We spoke to the officers who took a report from us. They asked us to describe the night's events in detail. They asked us if we saw them at all, and we explained how the peephole had been covered and the light had been smashed before moving away from the door. The officers advised us to speak to our landlord about, at the very least, getting security cameras. The older officer then closed the pad he had been writing in and looked up at us. He then spoke a phrase that made me understand how much danger we had been in. "Look, if any of you were my daughters, I would have wanted the officer to tell her. If you can get out of your lease, do it. They know where you all live, and they also know the response time for us, especially after telling you that they would be back." They asked if we had heard a vehicle or something along those lines, and we didn't hear anything at all. So likely it meant that they had come from the walking path, which would explain how they left without passing the police on their way back to the main road. Before the officers got up to leave, they said that they'd have a cruiser parked in our driveway, as well as a plain car around back. They won't have the chance to try this again. In the 2 weeks that we continued to live there, they didn't catch those men. We had a few creepy things, but nothing close to this. The reality was that they had not been caught, and that they could come back at any time. We spoke to our landlord, who was this real sweet woman who owned several properties around the town. She even let us move into a townhouse closer to campus. She explained that our safety was the most important thing, certainly more important than collecting a few $100s in rent. Even though this experience has come and gone, the terror that it provides me is still something I deal with, and that voice is still heard in my nightmares. Make sure you lock your doors always, and check who's there before you ever open them. in southern Georgia, so things over here can get real shady. I go to this Walmart all the time, and I've never had any problems with it whatsoever. I'm a 21-year-old male, so it makes this experience kind of strange, but here we go. I went shopping for groceries, doing my usual thing. It was around 8:30 p.m. by the time I got done checking out. As I was walking out of the store, I noticed this older gentleman staring at me all creepy-like. I just brushed it off until I noticed he was out in the parking lot staring as I was putting my groceries in the car. I decided to kind of hurry up the pace. I can defend myself, I'm a pretty muscular guy, but I don't even want it to get to that point. I got in my car, started to drive away, and I thought that was that. I get about a mile down the road before this black pickup starts riding my bumper. I slowed down and went off the road a little to let him pass, but he never did. He just kept his pace. I finally brake checked him and he passed, but as he was doing that, I noticed that it was the same old man from the parking lot. After he passed me, he brake checked me back and tried to make my car stop. This went on for about 10 minutes until I got aggravated and passed him on his left and sped off. I finally get home, go inside, and start to chill out when I get a Ring camera notification. As I check the video from my phone, I realize that it was the same man from the road, the same man from the parking lot, this time on my porch and staring menacingly right into my doorbell. Rather than confront this man myself, I call the cops and they make it out in about 10 minutes. But of course, the weird man is already long gone by that point. They tell me that there's nothing that they can do but to keep an eye out for this man in case he comes back, and then to have them come back out. I still don't know what to make of all this, but I wanted to let my story be known, as a reminder to everybody to keep their head on a swivel and be ultra aware of their surroundings, especially when you're leaving Walmart at night.